Good evening, I'm Grace Brown in Hong Kong and welcome to View TV News. Coming up on tonight's show. Tragedy strikes Indonesia after a tsunami kills more than 200 people on the islands of Java and Sumatra. Growing desperation among Hong Kong's rising number of working poor as subsidies are found to be ineffective. And police arrest 6 people for suspected illegal racing after a luxury sports car crashes in Taipo. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with an update on the killer tsunami in Indonesia that was triggered by an erupting volcano. The death toll has now shot past 220, while rescuers are scrambling to find survivors. Grace Lee reports.
More than 200 killed and survivors trapped under rubble. This is the aftermath of a tsunami that hit the islands of Java and Sumatra on Saturday night, the latest in a series of tragedies that have struck Indonesia. Officials say it was triggered by an underwater landslide after the eruption of the Anak Krakatau volcano.
Throughout data, we've confirmed that the tsunami was due to volcanic activities at Anak Krakatau.
Hundreds have been hurt and buildings in coastal areas struck hard. Authorities have warned residents and tourists to stay away from beaches, while a high tide warning remains in place until Tuesday. Officials say rescue workers and ambulances are unable to reach affected areas because roads have been blocked by debris. Indonesia's Disaster Mitigation Agency is still compiling information on the disaster and says the number of victims may go up. This comes at the tail end of a deadly year for Indonesia. 2018 saw earthquakes flatten parts of the tourist island of Lombok, claiming the lives of almost 100 in August. Thousands more were killed after a double quake and tsunami hit Sulawesi Island 2 months later. Anak Krakatau, an active volcano located halfway between Java and Sumatra, has been spewing ash and lava for months, erupting again just after 9 p.m. on Saturday. The tsunami struck just 30 minutes later. Experts say tsunamis triggered by volcanic eruptions are rare. And according to local media, coastal residents say they didn't see or feel any warning signs, like receding water or an earthquake, before waves of up to 2 meters hit the shore. Authorities say the tsunami was exacerbated by the abnormally high tide because of the full moon.
Elsewhere in the region, mainland authorities have confirmed more cases of the African swine fever in Guangzhou. 30 pigs caught the disease and 9 died on a farm with some 6,000 pigs in Huangpu district. Authorities say they followed emergency procedures and stopped other pigs from entering. They also culled infected ones and decontaminated the area. Just days ago, authorities cordoned off a slaughterhouse in Zhuhai, where 11 pigs died of the infection. The SAR government says none of the territory's supply of pork comes from Huangpu district. To Hong Kong now, where inequality issues are hitting the city's poor especially hard amid holiday festivities. There are growing voices urging the government to improve the subsidy scheme for low-income families, as the bureaucracy involved leaves many behind. Diane To reports.
Official figures show Hong Kong's working poor shot past 600,000 people last year, over 30,000 more than the year before. That's despite subsidies for low-income households. The government had estimated there would be 150,000 households applying for its working family allowance last year. Turns out only 26,000 applied for it. And according to the Society for Community Organisation, it's because there are just too many hoops applicants have to jump through. Among the issues, workers have to submit a monthly report on their working hours and pay, but that means trouble for those with unstable income.
When my husband doesn't get enough hours of work, he can't pay rent. But when he works overtime or extra shifts, then we cross the income ceiling and don't qualify for the subsidy.
The organisation is urging the government change its policy to have applicants submit half-yearly average reports instead of monthly. Also calling on the government to simplify the bureaucracy involved, SOCO's Ng Wai Tung said it's just too much paperwork for people who are already struggling with long hours that still leave them hand-to-mouth. He noted over the past 2 years, only about 7% of people were lifted out of poverty through this measure, which shows its effect is limited. Dianto, ViewTV News.
Meanwhile, the industrial sector lawmaker has hit out at the government's proposal to scrap the NPF offsetting mechanism. Jimmy Ng says it's too complicated and that his constituents don't entirely accept any of the suggestions. On a TV news show, Ng said his sector wants the government to further extend the grace period aimed at helping employers adapt to the policy change. The current plan is to subsidize businesses with nearly $30 billion over 25 years. The chief executive has said she's determined to scrap the mechanism, which allows bosses to claw back their pension contributions to cover severance and long service payments. But Ng has another option in mind.
An even simpler plan could be to just have employers increase their NPF contribution by 1 or 1.5% each month to tackle a potential offset later on.
Paul Chan confirmed today there'll be a surplus in this financial year as he called on the public to share their views in the consultation he's running for the 2019 budget. The financial secretary wrote on his blog that the public coffers are limited, so there are hard choices to make over where to put resources into. That's despite him announcing a record $138 billion surplus in February. Chan stressed there's no perfect answer to how best to spend the budget, raising the example of lawmakers' polar opposite reactions to his earlier proposed tax benefits. Though at a charity event today, he hinted at beefing up support for local athletes.
I can guarantee there will be a surplus in this financial year, and we will continue to work hard next year. Now, after we injected $6 billion into the Elite Athletes Development Fund in the budget earlier this year, it looks like we'll have to increase the amount.
Hundreds of people took to the streets today to demand Justice Secretary Theresa Cheng clear the air over the decision to drop the corruption case against CY Leung. The protesters marched from Chater Garden to Justice Place in Central. They urged Chung to explain in Legco why the DOJ stopped pursuing the former chief executive over his payments by Australian firm UGL while he was in office. They also echoed criticisms over the department's move not to seek independent legal advice on the case. The march was marred with clashes with counter-protesters as well. But most ralliers stayed on task, voicing their anger at the silence from the Justice Chief so far.
She completely failed to give the public her justifications for not prosecuting CY Leung. We are extremely disappointed in Theresa Cheng because Hong Kong's most important feature is its rule of law.
Police have arrested 6 people for suspected illegal racing after a luxury sports car crashed in Tai Po, leaving 2 people injured. The crashed Ferrari flipped upside down, its convertible roof torn off and glass shattered everywhere. It was traveling with 5 other supercars along Tai Po Road at 7 a.m. when it lost control and hit a slope. Authorities say the cars were reaching speeds of up to 98 kilometers an hour, almost double the road speed limit. Police arrested the drivers, adding they were not responsible for causing the driver who crashed to veer off the road during their sting operation. Coming up next, the latest from the world of business. The U.S. Treasury Secretary says President Donald Trump never suggested sacking the head of the Federal Reserve. That's after sources said the Oval Office had privately discussed the possibility of firing Jerome Powell. As Nathan Frandino reports, the rumors won't help cure the already volatile mood on Wall Street.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is increasingly becoming a target of U.S. President Donald Trump. Sources tell Reuters Trump has privately discussed the idea of firing Powell over the Fed's interest rate hikes, an unprecedented move that could rock financial markets and be seen as an attack on the central bank's independence. Just this past Tuesday, Trump warned against raising the rates amid a precipitous recent slide in the U.S. stock market. The president tweeting, "Feel the market, don't just go by meaningless numbers." The bank then lifted rates for the fourth time this year on Wednesday, citing the U.S. economy's strength.
This is the best year since the financial crisis. You've had growth well above trend.
U.S. stocks fell hard after the Fed's decision and amid uncertainty over a partial government shutdown. A president can dismiss a Fed board member for cause, but analysts say Trump's frustrations with the rate hikes would likely fall short of that standard. The White House and a Fed spokeswoman declined to comment, though Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin tweeted on Saturday, saying he had spoken with Trump, who said he disagrees with Fed policy but never suggested firing Powell. Powell was appointed by Trump and sworn in as Fed chairman last February.
Over in Tokyo, Japanese shares are on track to post their worst quarter since the 2008 financial crisis. Our correspondent Mayu Yoshida sat down with a top official in the country's finance ministry to discuss the risks facing Japan's economy.
So thank you very much for your time today. Let's start with the markets. Here in Tokyo, the Nikkei share average lost more than 2,000 points in a month. What are the risk factors behind this volatility we're seeing in the markets right now?
We are aware of risks to the global economic outlook, such as China-US trade frictions, capital outflows from emerging markets. I think financial markets are making nervous moves in reaction to such factors. We're facing risks in global economy and US-China trade dispute, so it's difficult to talk about Japan only. But I think underlying economic indicators are suggesting that Japanese economy and also the US economy are on firm footing.
Well, given the recent uncertainty we're seeing in the global economy, including the recent trade dispute, is Japan really ready to raise consumption tax to 10% next October?
We're discussing measures to ease the economic impact, such as a sharp drop in demand like we saw right after the previous tax hike. All tax revenue from the consumption tax hike next year will be used to improve our social security system. It's very important for us to equalize the tax burden given our aging society.
Well, let's also talk about corporate governance. Japanese companies are facing a lot of criticism over its corporate governance following recent scandals. For example, the arrest of Carlos Ghosn. What's your take on this situation surrounding Japanese companies?
I can't talk about individual companies, but Japan's corporate governance as a whole is making progress compared with Japanese companies in the past. Our financial services agency is also strengthening measures, while business leaders are more open to market opinions, and I feel that these factors are beefing up governance among companies in Japan.
Time for sports. Kicking off with English Premier League action, Crystal Palace stunned Manchester City with a 3-2 win at the Etihad overnight. The game started off well for the hosts when Ilkay Gundogan found the breakthrough with this header. But what happened next left the home fans in a daze. Jeffrey Schlupp equalised before Andros Townsend scored a contender for goal of the season. City did manage to make a comeback with Kevin De Bruyne's goal, but the visitors proved too good with Luka Milosevic sealing the deal. Palace's damaging defeat leaves City in second place, trailing behind Liverpool with 4 points. Well, it couldn't have been a better debut for Manchester United's new caretaker manager, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, with his side destroying Cardiff City 5-1 in Wales. The Norwegian only had to wait 3 minutes before the Red Devils took the lead with Marcus Rashford's free kick. That was followed by an Ander Herrera goal, while Anthony Martial and Jesse Lingard finished off